Hey microchurch, Jason Laird here. Today we're going to be looking at Mark chapter 13 verses 24 through 37. We're going to finish out the rest of Mark 13 today. And in this passage, Jesus is kind of continuing that same language that he's been talking over the last couple of weeks that we've been looking at. And he's been talking about the destruction of the temple, the impending destruction of the temple to come. And a lot of people take this and reference it to end times, which it could have some meaning in that, and we'll kind of get to that here in a second. But I think in verses 24 through 37, Jesus is still talking about both. He's talking about the impending destruction of the temple, and he's talking about the end times, the coming of his kingdom. And I just kind of want to unpack that a little bit with you. But I think that what we see here is mostly this continuation of the language of the destruction of the temple. And I think that because when you look at what he says in verses 24 through 27, what he's talking about in particular in these verses is actually quotes from Daniel 7, when he says, "But in those days after the tribulation, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers of heavens will be shaken, and they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. And then he will send out the angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of heaven." Right? This is language that we see in Daniel chapter 7. And Jesus is quoting this in the prophets of old, right? People like Daniel and Isaiah and these different people, what they would do is they would use this cosmic language, right? This language of, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give us light, the stars will fall. They use this language to represent God's impending judgment. And in this case, we know that God was going to judge the temple. And here's the deal, right? We know from history that the Romans came in, they destroyed Jerusalem, they besieged Jerusalem, all this stuff happened, and the temple was destroyed. But what Jesus was referring to and what we're needing to talk about and bring out here is that the authority that the temple had, the authority that the Pharisees and the scribes and all these people had, right, it moved from the temple to Jesus. And God is going to gather his people from every nation, from every tribe, every tongue, every language, every people groups. He's going to gather his people from every corner of the earth into his kingdom. We know that that's going to happen. And that's exactly what happened, right? When you look at history and you look at how everything unfolded after Jesus died and he ascended, everything that Jesus said that would take place took place. He ascended into heaven. He was enthroned right in the heavens. Followers, his people were persecuted. They were killed, right? In 70 AD, Rome besieged Jerusalem. Infighting started to occur. People started to kill each other. People died by the hands of their own people. People died by the hands of the Romans. And it was a tragic thing. And then the temple was destroyed. Everything that Jesus said was going to happen happened, right? Just as he described it. And so what does that mean for us today? Well, the first thing that I want to talk about and what it means for us and what Jesus was talking about when he said that all of this will occur, okay, is he was talking about the fact that the world as we know it, okay, everything as we know it is going to change. And eventually it's all going to be destroyed. But his word, right, Jesus Christ, will not. In fact, in verse 31, he says, "Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away." Right? Jesus remains forever. And so what that means is that you and I, we can fully trust in his word because his word does not change. It remains forever. Everything else that we rely on in this world, our money, fame, talents, business, economy, education, health system, right? All of that, government, it changes. And eventually it will be destroyed as we know it, and something else will take its place. But his word, Jesus Christ, remains forever. And so we can trust in his word. We can trust in Jesus Christ. The second thing that Jesus tells us is 7 times in Mark 13. 7 times, right? He tells us to be on guard or to watch in some form or fashion. 7 times. 5 times in verses 24 through the end of the chapter to verse 37. He tells us to be awake, to stay on guard, to be watchful, right? To be alert. And here's the deal. He's not saying that we are to sit and watch and see all these things happen and try to determine if it's that time or not and try to take guesses on if it is or not. He's not telling us that we need to be alarmist, right? We've been talking about that over the past couple of weeks. We are not to live in this alarmist mentality. That is not what Jesus is saying, right? But what we are to do, what he's encouraging us to do, is to live differently, to live as if we are living for his kingdom to come, to live as if we were following him, to live like Christ, to live differently. That's what Jesus is wanting us to do, to live like him. The third thing that we are to do in all of this is we are to rejoice in Jesus. We are to rejoice in who he is. See, everything is going to fail. Everything is going to fade. Everything is going to be destroyed. Everything is going to change except for Jesus. And he promises us in this chapter that he is going to gather his people and that one day we are going to rejoice on high and that his people are going to come from all over the globe, from every tongue, every tribe, every nation, every people groups, and that we are going to rejoice in him. And so, church, listen, we can take this, right, and we can be alarmed by it. We can be afraid of it. We can try to guess when the end times is going to be. But here's what we know. The world as we know it will change. Jesus will not. We can live differently. We can be on guard. We can be watchful, live like Christ, and we can rejoice in our Savior who does not change and who is going to establish his kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven.